Introduction. Well, it's good to have Shelly back with us. Many of you know Shelly Lesher from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. She has a background in nuclear physics and has done experimental research in nuclear physics. And she was actually a presidential fellow at Yale in 2019, just before the pandemic, where she spent almost a year with us before everything got cut short. But I just wanted to mention a couple of things about Shelly and her work. She got her PhD from University of Kentucky in nuclear physics. She was a postdoc at Livermore and in Belgium, and she has since been a professor at the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse. She's also a guest professor in the physics department at Notre Dame, where she's running some of the experiments for her group. And she is holding a couple of additional positions. She's the director of the conference experience for undergraduate, which is an annual program that is run as part of the DNP meetings to bring undergraduates to our annual DNP meeting. And she's the director of the McNair Scholars Program at the University of Wisconsin.
I can't swap displays.
Yeah, so just
okay, we have several people working on Zoom issues.
If you want extended displays, is that right?
Dave saves the day.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks so much. So Shelly is known for her research, for her work with undergraduates running the DNP-CEU program. And she also has a podcast, Nuclear Life. And she's going to tell us about, mentoring and all the work she has been doing with students.
Thank you, Karsten. Thank you, everyone. And thank you for those online. Nice to see you. So I'm talking about what we call evidence-based inclusive mentoring practices. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is some of the research behind mentoring and why it is important. And this might seem obvious to a lot of you or to all of you, but let's just make the exercise and let's go through why mentoring is so important. Then we're going to talk about what we can do. First, I want to tell you what the McNair Scholars Program is. So you don't have one here at Yale, but the McNair Scholars Program is named after Ronald E. McNair, who was an astronaut on the Challenger when it exploded. And it is a program, he was a Black physicist who then got a degree in engineering from MIT, a PhD from MIT. And the US Department of Education TRIO program created this program after him. What it does is it helps first generation and low income students, or those who are underrepresented in graduate education, graduate from college and then go to graduate school and then persist to their PhDs once they get there, with the hope that once you start populating the professoriate with students who are usually not there, they're going to help pull others like them up through the professoriate and help diversify. Now, through this position that I hold, I started really to dig into mentoring and what mentoring means. Some of this work was also done because of what I've seen through the CEU program and how students are mentored by professors throughout the country. And so that's kind of where this comes from. As part of the McNair program, I went through training from SIMMER, which is the Center, I just looked it up, something in research. So basically, it's a center in Madison, Wisconsin, who spent the last 20 years researching mentoring practices. And they train people, it's called Train the Trainer. So they train people like me to then have the ability to facilitate mentor training for others to allow you to become better, more thoughtful mentors to your student. So it's not that I'm training you to be a mentor, it's that I'm helping you to to expose what you already have. So basically taking mentoring practices out from behind closed doors and bringing them out into the open, like we've done with teaching, right? There's a lot of teaching and learning seminars and conferences. So this is doing the same thing with mentoring. So the first thing we need to discuss is, what is mentoring? Any ideas? Like, what is your definition of mentoring? Have you thought about it? Anyone want to take a stab?
Teaching someone to be just like me.
You're not serious, are you?
I am.
Teaching someone to be just like you.
For example, helping others succeed.
Helping others succeed, okay. Inspire,
Inspire and set an example.
okay. Inspire, set an example. So I am going to take my definition from the National Academies working definition. They did a report, they came out with a report last year on the science of effective mentorship in STEM, the M being medicine, the last M. Mentorship is a professional working alliance in which individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. Would you have come up with that one?
Same thing.
Same thing as just like me. So to me, this is a lot more than I thought mentorship was. Okay, now the National Academies, again, this is the science of effective mentorship. Now we see a lot of not effective mentorship, but we're going to talk about using this definition to talk about why we want to be involved in effective mentorship. Now, does this take more time? Yeah. Are you going to get better results? Yeah, you are. Okay. Okay, that was not.
See your mouse, can you click later?
Yeah.
Oh, you see it. Yeah, unfortunately, you have to like turn it now. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
And then you have to click on your slide again.
Okay. Oh,
Right.
ah, okay, the Zoom thing. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
So what is the psychosocial support? So this is all the stuff that as physicists we don't like talking about. This is the fuzzy stuff. This is encouraging your mentee. It's using active listening techniques to talk to them, meaning you listen without judging. You look them in the eye, you smile, you encourage, you know, stuff physicists don't like to do. This actually provides a connection between you and the person that you're working with. You serve as a role model and a guide for your mentee's behavior, values, and attitudes. This is one that I have to be careful with because I like complaining sometimes, especially when I get really worked up about something. And that's not good to do when you're mentoring someone, because you don't want your mentee to think that all you do is complain and therefore the field is just horrible because all you're doing is complaining, right? You want to model the behavior that you know, you want to make sure that you're modeling the behavior that you want your mentee to see. And you also want to be that model of someone that your mentee can see themselves in the future. Does your mentee see themselves in you as a career option or as someone that they want to aspire to be like? Even if that isn't as a scientist, but as a person. So why is mentoring students important? And I'm going to preface this by saying positive mentoring experiences, because there are negative mentoring experiences and we know what happens when that happens. So this is important because the consistently reported on top 3 reasons that students leave doctoral programs. 1, lack of funding or financial stress. So these reasons are from all PhD programs, not just physics and not just science. So some of this is students who are not funded leave because they lack funding. Physics does a better job because we're able to fund our graduate students. Now, is that enough funding? there's a big debate right now if that's true or not. But a lot of students will leave because they have some sort of financial stress. Second, supervision problems, mentoring. Oh, sorry, that was 1, 2. Mentoring. The second reason students will leave a PhD program is because they don't get along with their advisor. That can be fixed. That is your problem that you can fix. As a department, you can fix that. You can prevent students from leaving. Third is personal/family problems. So it's always been reported as personal family problems, but actually recently a study was done in 2021 that related that to severe anxiety. So it's not just personal problems, it's mental health. Which again, guess what? You can bring back to advisor problems. If you're not getting along with your advisor, if they're causing you mental stress, mental anxiety, these kind of feed into each other. So, okay, Zoom people are just getting a really bad view of me. I think it's better that I'm just not. I'm turning off, I can't turn off my Zoom camera, okay. They're just getting like this picture of me, which is a very bad. Okay, so this is really the 3 reasons that students leave graduate school. Now, this survey taken during the pandemic, during students' mental health, is that students scored very low on well-being factors. Over 2/3 of them scored low on well-being factors. What are well-being factors? Things that make you happy. Are they being social? I mean, this is to be expected, right? Are they being social? Are they talking to advisors? Are they getting exercise? Those things that make you people, things that make you human. Students scored very low on those. 32% had symptoms of PTSD. Okay, this shouldn't be surprising going through the pandemic, how students were feeling. 1 in 2 PhD students have experienced psychological distress. And here's the thing that when I point this out, it's because you can fix it. Faculty members and advisors are not trained or informed of these matters and do not know how to best support them. That's what students consistently said. Now, am I saying that you need to be someone who is trained to help students in, their mental problems? No, we're not trained to do that. Should you have a relationship with your students that they trust you enough to tell you that they're having problems? Yes. And should you know the resources available to them to point them in the right direction? Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, I was going to say you seem uncomfortable.
Yeah.
What's uncomfortable about that?
No, I was just bringing back memories.
Oh.
Both good and bad.
Okay. So this one's hard, right? Because we don't want to overstep our bounds. We don't want to overstep this kind of squishy area. But if your student is having a hard time, they should feel comfortable enough to come to you and say, I'm having a hard time. And you should be able to point them to the resources they need to be able to help them through that hard time. That's not going to be you. You don't have the skill set. Okay? But all they're asking for is for you to tell them where to go. All right, comments, questions?
I was just gonna say a person.
Okay. We also know from research that good mentoring increases diversity. So more diverse and inclusive STEM workplaces are more creative, they're more innovative, and they are more responsive to current and emergent problems. Teams of diverse experience and areas of expertise ask different questions. They tend to be more creative, they tend to be more innovative. In research groups, diverse teams produce higher impact research. And guess what? Also, graduate students publish more when they're mentored well. So you get something out of it too. Your students publish more and they get out earlier. Right. And more. Graduate students note that the experience with their advisor is the most important factor when they complete their STEM degree. One, it's kind of binary if they do or don't complete it, that's you. And also the time it takes for them to complete it also is determined by their advising choice. Graduate students more likely to publish their research. Good advising increases recruitment of underrepresented students into graduate school and research-related career paths. And women and underrepresented students are better integrated into the STEM community. So hopefully we can all agree that these are all positive things that we want to happen. I'm going to tell you, we all agree these are positive things that we want to happen. Okay, so there's a couple problems. One is that a study came out in 2015 that analyzed 1.03 million PhDs in the US. Over 1 million PhDs in the US. So that's like all of them. And they found that women and underrepresented students who have like advisors, so advisors that share their same characteristics, so women and women, Black men with Black men, are more successful. And I use success in quotes because they say what they consider success. And success means that they obtain elite faculty positions and continue on to research careers. So they looked at women who were advised by Nobel laureates who did not obtain elite faculty positions, but women who were advised by women did. So it didn't matter how great or how well accomplished your advisor was. If you did not identify with them, you did not obtain statistically an elite research position. Now, of course, there's going to be cases where this is not true, obviously. But statistically, this is what panned out. Oh, as a side product, this paper is really good because it also said that that a majority of the professors at elite institutions came from like 5 universities, one of which was University of Wisconsin-Madison, which was the one that surprised me. I mean, the other ones were like Harvard, MIT, but Madison surprised me. Okay. So what happens as this paper also reveals in these million PhDs, what the population of the professoriate looks like. And it stopped at 2011, and it hasn't looked at the 10-year period, so it goes in 10-year chunks. So the 2021 next chunk isn't out. So you can see that the PhD recipients to faculty member to professors kind of have this 10-year kind of progression. So you look at what happens when you have, the PhD in 80, 81, then becomes a faculty member in 90, 91, and then hopefully a professor in 2000, 2001. So you can kind of look at it in those steps. And you see that with time, women do make up a higher percentage of PhD recipients, so that's good. Underrepresented minorities also are increasing. Those with Asian backgrounds are also increasing, and the number of just white men are decreasing. However, that is slightly delayed in the professoriate. The question is if that's going to continue. If we're going to be losing people in the pipeline, or if it's still going to remain white male full professor majority when you get to that last step. I'm part of the long range plan committee, writing committee, and we're seeing in nuclear physics that we're actually losing women. There aren't enough underrepresented people in nuclear physics to actually keep statistics. So we look at women, and we are losing women in the tenure lines between associate and full. So that is bearing out in the data between 2004 and 2020. So we have to wait and see what happens. I was at a talk that someone from the DOE said that he wanted to achieve gender parity by 2026. My question was, who was he going to kill? Because I don't know how that could possibly happen in physics by 2026. Okay, so next we're going to look at, so this is again, like, why is this important? We're going to look at tenure completion rates. So the solid lines are women, and the dotted lines are male. And again, we only have, this is being done in just binary. It's just male, female. And I want to point out where we are interested, and that is the 10-year PhD completion rates in math and science. So math and physical science, women completed their PhDs in, only 52% of women completed their PhDs in 10 years versus 59% of men. That becomes really depressing when you look at what happens when you break down African American, Asian American, and Hispanic American. In math and physics, only 37% of African American men complete a PhD in 10 years. Just let that sink in a second.
I also find it surprising that anybody, everybody, nobody, but yeah, 50, 60%, only 50 or 60%.
Yeah, and that's what, when I was doing this research, that also shocked me that 10 years, I mean, when you're kind of in the field, you think everybody finishes, but you look at the statistics and that just is not true. There's a lot of people that leave after a year that you don't even notice because you're just so busy wrapped up in yourself. And then, you know, maybe you and your friends finish, but there's a lot of people in other areas that didn't. You're just so wrapped up in yourself, you don't notice. But you are all part of an extremely elite group of people. And I cannot stress that enough. And when you look at the data, you realize just how elite we are. I mean, I think it's like 9% of physics full professors are women. That's where we are. And it's hard to wrap your mind around those numbers when you're looking at the field. But yeah, 37% of African-American men who start a PhD will actually complete one. So somehow we have to fix this.
Do you know if there's significant variation by subfield?
This doesn't go into subfield.
Would be interesting to see where physics actually stand.
Yeah. So some of, and again, this is from 2007, some of this, they do break it down between engineering is broken out, but they always put chemistry and physics together. I don't know if it's just small numbers, but usually chemistry and physics are together, engineering separate. So the study also found that diversifying the professoriate helps all students because it turns out men and white students are mostly insensitive to the race or gender of their advisor. They don't care. Turns out you can stick most white men in a closet with a book and they're still going to get their PhD. I joke, I know that's not true. But no matter what pairings they took, it turned out white men were just as successful. It didn't matter who their advisor was, where they came from, what their gender was, what their race was, what their configuration of group was. It seems like they were still okay. But these things really mattered when you looked at people who were underrepresented in some way. So be it race, ethnic, gender, whether it be people who were first generation in their family to go to college, people who were from families who were financially struggling. Those factors impacted how students did. So we also have another problem. What we traditionally do in physics are structured to benefit the majority of students, which is white, male, heteronormative, continuing generation, and upper and middle class. I'm sorry, I'm just going to put it out there. That is what we do. So we shouldn't be surprised when we look around and that's what the field looks like. We traditionally have triad mentorship configurations where we have a faculty member who talks to the postdoc, who talks to the graduate student, who talks to the undergrad. I'm not saying you do, I'm saying traditionally in physics, that's how it works. It's a hierarchy in which there's very little interaction between the undergrad and the faculty member. there's also this way of doing things, which is I'm the advisor. I tell you what to do. You go off and do it. You come back to me when you're done. And if that sounds familiar, you're like, why isn't that a good way to do it? I'm going to tell you why. Okay. So there are things, so a triad is no direct contact between the undergrad and the faculty member. And I'm concentrating on undergrads right now because if you can't get an undergrad to go to grad school, you're kind of screwed. You're not going to get them. So it could be a closed triad, which means there's contact between all the members in the group. So you have interaction between the graduate student and the undergrad and the faculty member. You're all together. So men are more likely to be in closed triads. And that could be because if all three members are men, then they feel like they're like, and they feel comfortable with each other. So then they feel like they can all hang out and talk, right? There's a negative effect on the development of women's scientific identity and intentions to continue in STEM when they are in what's called an open triad, meaning there's this hierarchy. So I'm an undergrad student. I only talk to my grad student who relays information from the faculty member. That's more likely to happen for women and underrepresented students. So they feel really out of touch with what's going on. So underrepresented students in closed triads have very positive, Barry's not in there, have growth in scientific identity and continuation in STEM, even if they aren't with like mentors. So I think you can see having this closed triad is good for everyone. Good news though, mentoring is a skill or a craft, and it can be taught and honed. Some people are just naturally good at it. I mean, you know them, right? You're just like, wow, how do you know to talk to people that way? Some people are just really good. Some people are not. That's fine. You know that there's a teaching center on campus, right? You can go there, you can learn how to teach, you can learn teaching methods, you can learn this and that and this. Mentoring is the same way. There is a large body of research on ways to mentor. So you can learn how to do it. And that's what I'm going to talk about here in a second. So let's talk about effective mentoring behaviors, but just read this cartoon for a second, because this is kind of like the epitome. So this would be a bad mentoring interaction, but one you can completely see happening. So, I'll pretend to be interested in your research. Okay, so let's go back to our definition. Okay. Mentorship is a professional working alliance in which the individuals work together over time to support the personal and professional growth, development, and success of the relational partners through the provision of career and psychosocial support. Okay, so what is the first thing this says? Mentoring is bidirectional. That is news to probably most people here. It's not just I as the mentor tell you as the student what to do and you go off and do it. I as the student, what do I have invested in that? Yeah, I'm going to get my PhD, but what do I have invested in that? Okay. Mentors have something invested as well. It's not just someone's doing the research for you, which is what students think, that they're like, oh, I'm just doing your research for you. Like, great. I'm just like, when in good mentoring relationships, mentors learn new knowledge and skills, and they learn new perspectives from their mentees. They also have the satisfaction of enjoyment gained from working with a mentee and improves their professional life. It's better than the free ice cream I offer CEU mentors. But I'm sure we all have these really good relationships with some of our former students or former mentees or mentors that we can look back on. So what I want to do is for everyone to close your eyes. I know this sounds stupid, but close your eyes. And I'm going to ask you questions, and this is why I want to close your eyes. Who chose their graduate student advisor based solely on the research they were doing? Okay. Who chose their graduate mentor based solely on their because that mentor was the one they wanted to work with. Someone raise their hand for both of them. Okay, who took both into consideration? Okay. Okay, some of you weren't sure. Okay, so there were very few people that, you can open your eyes now, sorry. There are very few people that said they chose their advisor based solely on their research. So how you mentor is important for students, and it becomes more and more important as time passes. I know when I was a student, I didn't even know there was a choice. I thought you just did the science. Like, you do the science, you just get the mentor you get. When we talk to McNair students, we tell them to choose the mentor. Because as I showed you in the statistics, the mentors will make or break your career. So you're interested in a subject, choose the best mentor. If your mentor's excited about something, it'll work out. You can always change later. And one of that reason is because if you have a good mentor, they understand how to work with you. And a good mentoring relationship is bidirectional. And that is, you can think of it more as a co-pilot relationship. You're both in charge of the plane. Not one of you is driving it, you both are. You have to build trust over time. Just because you're the professor doesn't mean that student trusts you. Doesn't mean that student is going to respect you in your opinion. They might be scared of you because you have their career in your hands, but it doesn't mean they trust you. So that has to be built over time. You have to allow both parties to guide the relationship. Conditions could change. It's not always going to be easy, but what each of you wants out of the relationship could change with time. But you have to communicate. And communication is key. You have to have a relationship in which the student is comfortable coming to you and asking questions, but also saying, this isn't working. Can we do something different? Because students want to have control over their future. And if they don't, then they're not going to be invested in the project. And so this is a skill that improves with guidance and commitment. So I'm running out of time, but I want to talk about probably the most important part of this, which is how many of you have mentoring contracts? Okay, let me ask it a different way. How many of you have written expectations for your students? Okay, let me ask it another way. How many of you sit down with your students once a year to talk about what they should accomplish within the next year and the steps it takes to do that? Okay, one, maybe. Okay, how many students, students don't have to raise their hand. How many students feel comfortable enough to tell their advisor that they want to do something and ask what steps they need to take to do it?
I'm not a student anymore, but I did that.
You did that?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Okay, how many students are evaluated constructively on a yearly basis? Okay, so we have some work that could be done. Okay, the most important thing I found is to have clear expectations, not just the mentor and the student, but the student to the mentor. Many problems occur because the student doesn't know what the mentor wants, but the mentor thinks they're perfectly clear to the student. Guess what? You're not. Come meet me if you have questions. Turns out that is not clear. You know why? The student thinks you're busy. The student thinks their question is stupid. The student thinks if they ask the question, you're going to think they're not doing their work. So they don't ask. Then you think they're not doing anything. Does this sound familiar? See a loop happening? Okay. You assume they know because why shouldn't they know? I told them to read that paper. They didn't have any questions. So more constructively is, a new student comes in and you say, I would like you to read the background information, not call me if you have questions, but next week we are going to go over this paper and we're going to sit and talk about it. Okay, students going to have questions because how could they not possibly have questions when you gave them a new paper? But now, instead of putting the onus on them, the onus is on you to teach that student what's in the paper and to give them the space to ask you questions. So that's just an example. Does this take more time? Yeah, sure. But does it work in the long run? Yeah, because now that student understands the paper, so then the next paper you give them, they're actually going to understand. And so what would have taken like months of them going, I don't know, is now condensed to 2 weeks where they actually know what's going on. So they become independent faster. So there's a lot more kind of like work at the beginning. And then you have these mentoring contracts where every year you say, these are the things that I want you to accomplish this year. And then you ask the student, what would you like to accomplish this year? Maybe the student wants to go to a conference in Hawaii for DNP. Maybe that's their goal. And then it's up to you to say, okay, that's your goal. These are the things I want you to do to accomplish that. And I will send you to Hawaii. If the student gets those things done, they get to go to Hawaii. What a great motivator for them to do the things you want them to do so that they get the things they want. Great. Building trust. Each party gets what they want. See how this works out? Okay. So that's just a couple examples. I have a lot more, but I think the mentoring contract I find is the most important one. At the end of the year, then you go back and you look at the goals that you wrote down and you say, okay, this is what I think you did well. Let's celebrate the victories. I think you can improve in these areas. It's never everything is fine. Don't ever tell a grad student everything's fine. They need to improve. They want to improve. You don't give them something to improve, they're going to be a little upset. I'm going to tell you, I speak to a lot of grad students and they said, I can't possibly be doing everything great. Constructive criticism, and then you map out your goals for the next year or the next 6 months. Okay, maybe in 6 months, something changes and you have to redo the contract, but there's always then a written expectation so everyone knows where they are at all times. Okay, I'm going to end there because I'm about end of time and I'd like to take your questions. So.
I have a question about that, the mentoring contract. As you envision it, does it list out like the technical goals for that year or like the mentorship related goals or both, or like what's in there? I guess.
So it's very open. I have some examples, but it really depends on you and your mentor. So, and it changes, like, so your first year, it's going to be like, okay, these are your classes you have to do, right? So it's very kind of simple. You know, maybe you have a very technical project and your goal is for you to build this, right? Like, so at the end of the year, this physical thing needs to be done. Then it would be very technical. Maybe these are the steps that it takes, and maybe there's milestones every few months. But the more detailed it is, kind of the better, right? So if you like, you know, data needs to be analyzed by a year. Okay, that's pretty broad. Okay, but if you say, okay, I would like this part or like this part of the code or something like that done in 3 months, and then this and this month and this and this month. Are you going to make those goals? I don't know, but at least it's something to work towards so that you have that milestone that when you meet, you can say, okay, how close am I to this point? So it could be as technical as you want, I guess, but that's between there. Everyone's is going to look different depending on what your goals are.
You know, currently what fraction of advisors do have a contract?
I'm going to guess close to 0 in physics, because every time I give this talk, people look at me like I have 2 heads. And people, I'm sorry, So there is a department that prides themselves on being good mentors and have mentoring contracts, and I find that they don't actually use them. They have them, but when I talk to students, they say they don't actually use them. They just say, write your thesis, sign here. So it's like, you might as well not have it. And I find the number one reason is that we don't like conflict. Nobody likes conflict. And so this is also the place that told me that they're always told they're doing great. So they might as well not have a contract because it doesn't mean anything, because no one's getting any help. So you have to be, and that's where the trust comes in. You have to be willing to take the constructive criticism. Now, your mentor shouldn't be an ass about it and tell you you're a horrible person, blah, blah, blah. Again, that's where the trust comes in. So, oh, sorry, you had a question.
So in your experience with giving these talks, how receptive have you found faculty or departments to, I don't know, actually taking something away from your talks? And I don't know if there's a good way to gauge if.
It's hard. I find that students are way more receptive, which means that it's a continuous problem in departments that faculty don't think is a problem, but students do. Oh.
Do you have any advice on giving feedback in a way that doesn't make the person giving feedback come off like an ass? Because I'm very interested in giving feedback, but I oftentimes, like, as you said, hesitate because I'm like, oh, I don't want to hurt somebody's feelings, or I don't want to do it in a way that discourages them. So, like,
yeah, so it helps to always tell them all the things that they're doing well first. So that's why it helps when it's in like a session in which you're evaluating their progress.
okay.
So you talk to them about the things they're doing well, and then you frame it as things which need improvement or things which could be improved. And instead of saying you're doing this bad, say, you know, these are skills which could be improved, and this is how you can work towards that goal. So never just, this is bad, but this is something that you can work on, and then give them the resources to work on it is usually the better way to frame it.
Thank you.
So do you think, like, for the faculty, like a community of mentorship practice would work? Because sometimes,
Yes.
so I come from an adjacent field that mentoring is a problem. And oftentimes the folks who are supervising, if they don't get into with each other in terms of like, support each other, because that
Yes,
is
that's the last part of my talk, which is mentoring has to come out from behind closed doors and into the open. It needs to be a mentoring community where mentors help each other and learn from each other. Just like we do with teaching, just like we do with research. It needs to be that we learn skills from each other and we talk to each other. And so you need that support, because we don't know how to deal with all the problems that we find, or we might be like, okay, my grad student gave me this weird look when I said this, like, am I approaching this in the wrong way? Like, how would you deal with this? We need that, so you need to create that community. So that does help.
Number of departments talk about mentoring contracts. It's a lot of times I would call lip service. Do you know if the departments have actually department-wide implemented?
The one I know doesn't actually implement it, which I mentioned. There is a group, like it's the band collaboration, has actually implemented one. And they seem to be doing fairly decent job at continuing it. And that might be because because it's a collaboration, the people who are mentoring are not from the same department. So it might be easier to give feedback to someone who is not, you know, directly under you, I guess. But I gave a talk there and they seem to be doing fairly good at this, but they have mentoring contracts, they give feedback, they give, the students give talks, and then the whole group comes together and gives joint, like, written feedback to students so that students don't know what individual said what, and then the advisor sits with them and goes over their talk and reviews the feedback with them. So they have a really good kind of feedback loop.
Yeah, I really like the idea of mentoring contract. I think as we heard here, everybody has a different idea of what mentoring is supposed to be. So starting out with sitting down and, you know, setting out what each other's expectations are. I think that's really important. And to get back to your question of, not that I do this all that well, but establishing like articulating a common goal, you know, what it is that you as a mentor-mentee relationship, like what, you know, what you're trying to accomplish, the research, that kind of is supposed to.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Should we see?
Oh, are there any questions on Zoom? Oh.
So Sana says, I also feel like it's valuable to point out places. Do you want to ask a question or comment? Sana?
Sure. Actually, Shelly ended up mentioning this about like 7 or 8 minutes after I posted this, but it was basically about constructive criticism and, you know, where she mentioned that, you know, students can't possibly, if they're hearing everything's fine, that can't possibly be true. But I also think, you know, for the advisors who maybe only ever give out, like, for example, just like being honest with my experience, I have like overall a pretty good relationship with Laura, but one of my things is like every time I do hear feedback, it is more on the critical side. And basically when everything's going well, I hear nothing. And I wish that that wasn't the case. And it's certainly something to talk about. But as a result, I think it's valuable to point out places where the student is strong so that you can further hone that one skill that comes a lot more naturally. Just because I think that if those strengths aren't highlighted, then that there's probably this unspoken expectation between the advisor and the student that hasn't been communicated. And because it hasn't been highlighted, the student could potentially wean off of not doing that one or two things that they're naturally good at. And then the advisor goes, oh, that's weird. They're like slacking off. They might not be slacking off. You just might never have highlighted something that they do well. And also, you know, kind of robbed them of an opportunity to continue to perfect that skill that comes so naturally, because it still needs work. So yeah.
Very, very good point. Absolutely. I think what as faculty and as advisors we lose sight of is that we need to communicate with our students what they do well, and we need to tell them when they do a good job. It's not that we always have to be like, oh yeah, you're doing great, but think back to the time that you were in grad school and how hard it was and how much you doubted yourself at times. And, you know, you need to hear that, you need that feedback loop. Yeah. I'll move to my last slide, which was what can you do? And that includes develop your skills as a mentor, mentor-mentee entering research training. It turns out Yale has many SIMR trained facilitators on campus. I guess they do offer the training for postdocs, I've been told. I couldn't find it for faculty, but postdocs definitely can get mentor training. This probably won't ever happen, but consider mentoring when hiring. I cannot tell you how many times I've been on awards committees or panels or anything else when you just say, oh, this person doesn't do well with students or isn't a good, you know, doesn't work with students or doesn't do this or is an ass. And they're like, but the science is so good. Like it excuses them from being a horrible human being. But somehow, if you do science well enough, it excuses you from being a despicable person. Create an inclusive environment, create new near-peer networks, and allow your graduate students and postdocs to work with mentor training and with each other and give them the skills to be successful at this too.
What are near-peer networks?
Sorry, near-peer networks are, oh, and BMCU. So near-peer networks are that postdocs mentor grad students. So this does not replace the research part. So research is completely separate, but this is having someone in the lab that you can talk to about other things. So it would be a postdoc mentoring a grad student. So those are near peers. Or an older grad student mentoring a first-year grad student. But they would not be in the same group because you don't want the research to overlap when it would take the place of a research meeting with their faculty advisor, because then you're getting into an open triad, which you don't want. And then, and then here's the have support networks for mentors to share challenges and help each other. So again, bringing that mentoring out into the open. And then here is the Science of Effective Mentorship in STEM, which I highly recommend reading. There's a lot of really, really great information, and they have suggestions on how departments can implement change, how individuals can implement change, how societies, how universities, that sort of thing. And you can read the document, or you can do the interactive web pages, which is probably the way that most of you will interact with it, which is also fine too. So.
Are you going to make your slides available?
I can,
Okay.
because then you get all the resources. So, thanks.
Okay.